So welcome everyone to today's UX Design Office Hour. We've got a very special guest today. Emily and Fabio will be having a conversation with Danita, one of our other UX design mentors, and we'll be asking questions about advice for upcoming UX designers, Danita's UX design career path and trajectory, and it should be a really exciting session. So Emily and Fabio have prepared a few questions, but by all means, chime in with questions of your own. So if you have a question that you'd like Danita to answer, you can either post it in the chat on the side of the screen, or you can unmute your microphone and ask it out loud. So without further ado, Emily, I'll hand it off to you and you can start the conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Danita, for joining us. Really excited to have you on. Why don't we get started by having you tell us a little bit about your background and your pathway into UX? Like, what did you go to school for? How did you become a UX designer?
Okay. I have a little bit of an untraditional path into UX design, but it all kind of makes sense in the end. So I originally went to undergraduate for cognitive psychology, and that program was more research-based, so I really learned more about like how the brain processes information and how we make decisions. And then after that degree, during that degree, I spent most of my summers and holidays working on a portfolio, and I used all of my electives to take art classes and design classes, and then I went to art school where I studied visual communications, photography, and fashion design, mostly visual communications, which is what my school called graphic design. And then after that, because to pay for my own way through art school, I worked as an admin assistant. So after I finished art school, I had a lot of extensive knowledge of Microsoft software, which made it really easy for me to get a job as a designer at an in-house department in a large firm. So I started off my design career working for Jones Lang LaSalle, which is a really large commercial real estate firm. And then after Jones Lang LaSalle, I worked at Ernst & Young, then KPMG. So a lot of big Fortune 500 companies, as well as a bunch of banks like Barclays and Wells Fargo. After several years of working for big companies, I really wanted to work for smaller startups. So I worked at Pandora for 3.5 years. And then after Pandora, or while I was at Pandora, I started to get a little bit bored with just basic web design. And I really wanted to do something a little bit more interesting. While I was at Pandora, we went through a major redesign. So I got to see more what the UX designers did. And I really decided that I wanted to shift more towards that direction. So I went back to graduate school to study UX design, or actually human computer interaction / UX design. And I first was working as a freelance UX designer for the last 3 years, but I recently started working full-time with FormStack, which is a company that makes it easy for other companies to build complex forms.
Awesome. Yeah, that's I love hearing everyone's background and how they get into UX design, because it's never a linear path.
No.
Which I think is so cool, and I hope that students are encouraged by that too, because so many different fields provide relevant and good foundations for getting into UX, and it's every background and every wherever you came from is valid and valuable, and you'll be able to use skills, like transfer skills you had into being a good UX designer. So that's so cool. Let's see. So I like too that you've got experience working in-house and freelancing. So I would encourage students to ask questions about those things if you're interested in doing either.
I've also worked at agencies as well.
Oh,
I
cool.
forgot to mention that before Pandora, most of my career was as a long-term contract designer.
Oh, cool.
Which is why I got to work at so many of those companies. Most of my contracts were between 3 months to 6 months, 3 months to a year. So instead of working with 5 designers for 5 years, I got to work with maybe 60 designers during those 5 years.
That's so awesome.
Awesome. Great to hear that. I was a bit late, so hey, Danita and Fabio, another host here. As Emily said, it's always great to see how people come in from different areas and end up working in UX. So it almost seems like it's written in your destiny. Like if it's meant to be, like, trust me, you can work in wine or web design, you're gonna end up in UX. So great to hear that. Nice to meet you as well. We haven't had a chance to chat earlier. What I want to ask you is, when you made the transition, you went back to school, you studied human-computer interaction, then you started working on in UX. What were some of the most difficult aspects of doing that transition?
I think for me, because I started off working remotely as a freelance UX designer, it was a little bit difficult, but my capstone project in my graduate school was also, half of it was remote. So I had kind of figured that out, like sort of, but then when you're doing it all by yourself, it's a little bit different. But yeah, it was interesting having to do all of my users' studies remotely and to do it all remotely and be the only person there to take the notes and do all of that stuff. So that was a little bit challenging, and just my initial estimation of how long things would take was completely off.
It's funny you mentioned that, because a lot of the students, they work on their capstone projects remotely as well here in the course. So a lot of the students here, they're gonna be conducting remote usability testings, remote user research, surveys, interviews, and all of it. So if you were to give a tip to whoever's watching and is working on a remote project, what would that tip be? Like, you can be like,
I would say,
doesn't have to be just one tip. Like if you have like a top 3, you can go for it.
I would say definitely try different tools out and practice with a friend or somebody who's like just, in the same room as you, and test different tools out before you actually run studies. Because figuring out the combination of screen sharing, screen recording, voice recording that you need in order to get all the information, as well as to then later transcribe all of this information in a way that you can easily find your notes, took a little bit of practice.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a student question that Shumila asked right in the beginning that I want to jump to. Okay, her question is, developers are increasing their UX design knowledge, which seems easier than designers gaining enough knowledge of what's practical and doable rather than simply providing good visuals. What can designers do to make their work more implementation ready?
It's funny she should say that, because my boyfriend's actually a programmer, and when we first started dating, he was actually trying to learn more design skills. But I actually don't necessarily think it's easier. It's just different. But I would say that as a designer, especially a UX designer, I think you should have at least a basic understanding of HTML and CSS. You don't have to be able to make complicated apps, but I think having that basic understanding, plus maybe taking or maybe just trying to build a very simple app, just so you understand how back-end issues can affect your UX design. I think just understanding each of those buckets, like the back-end, the front-end, and then the UX design, will help you immensely in working with developers.
Awesome. I think that's a great idea. And there are a lot of resources out there too.
Yeah. I suggest Codecademy for HTML and CSS.
Yeah. And to add on to that a little bit, I think there's a program, I think I was talking about this recently, software that's pretty new to the industry. I think it's a few years old, called Principal, and it's for designing interactions and sort of transitions in between states or in between screens. I think that can be really helpful when you're informing or working closely with the developer so that they know what to do or how to load different components or different units in, and how they should maybe exit the screen, and being thoughtful about all of the different maybe elements of motion that can be part of the design too. But yeah, let's see. I think we had another.
Go ahead.
I
want to jump into that. Yeah, I want to add something to that. I definitely hear what you're saying, Shu, and I agree with that quite a bit. I do think it's easier to learn design than it is to learn coding. That might be because I just really hate coding, but I disagree with that. I think it's easier to learn design. I mean, not easier to become a great designer, not what I'm saying, but for you to grasp the basic concepts of how you develop things that are easy to use, I think that's a bit easier than learning how to set up a database and just git commit. But that's not even like the major topic here. Just in general, it's good for everyone that developers are more aware of how great user experiences are created. It's just the overall net effect of developers at least being aware of, I mean, I need to think of how my user is going to go through this, and is this intuitive or not. That's just good because it makes your life easier when you're doing quality assurance. It makes for better businesses, makes for better products. Just the overall net effect is very, very highly positive.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the company I currently work for, we work in cross-functional teams, and just my having an understanding of what they do and them having an understanding of what I do means that while we're working on something, either side feels comfortable just IMing each other and saying, yeah, I have a question about this, rather than just, I'm just going to guess.
No, and that's very important. Like, especially as a designer, you want to know the limitations of the platforms you're designing for. So as Danita is saying, I mean, you should have a basic knowledge of HTML, CSS coding, so that you know what the limitations are and you know how to talk to developers. That's essential. In addition to it, one essential tip for making your work implementation ready, in addition to providing clear explanations and prototyping and all of it, major tip, talk to the developers. Like, just have communicate often, and that solves just so many issues. Like, don't just hand over and expect them to figure out what you were thinking when you were designing. Just talk to them constantly, do regular check-ins, test often with the users, and do all of it. Yeah. And again, that solves a lot of issues.
The other thing I would say is, a lot of times when I communicate with the developers, is they ask me questions but then point out that I forgot a screen or I completely wasn't thinking about something. So it definitely helps, so that in the end I'm not scrambling trying to get them a design because they're already working on it.
100%. Like, how many times the developer pointed out that, hey, this doesn't make that much sense. I was like, yeah, thanks, man. It really doesn't. Let's fix it. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we have another question from a student. So this question is, could you share your first UX portfolio? And I don't know, I don't personally have my first UX portfolio online anymore, but maybe we could talk about
I don't have it either.
And did you include all of your previous work? And maybe we could just talk about portfolios in general.
I would say, I assume that the person asking this question is asking about previous work because they already have design work, but not UX design work, which is a good question. One of my students has also asked me this question. And I would say it depends on what kind of job you want, especially if you want to work for startups. you as the UX designer will probably also be the brand designer and the print designer and the everything designer, because startups usually, if you're lucky, have, you know, 1 to 2 designers out of 5 to 10 people. So so you're probably going to be doing everything. But if you would like to work for a larger company, I would say you should put your other design skills to showcase them and to show that you do have, you know, design knowledge, even if it's not UX. I would say I'd skew more towards web design or digital design projects than I would include print, if that's not what you want to specialize in anymore. And then as you get more UX projects, I would remove the other projects, just so you have a nice portfolio of 5 to 10 projects.
That's great advice. I hope that was helpful. Chime in with other questions about portfolio stuff if anybody else has.
Oh, I forgot. So the other thing I probably say about UX portfolios is I like to see, when I look at other people's portfolios, I like to see that they have a process. And I like to also see ideas that maybe didn't make it to the end. And their reasoning for why it didn't make it, even if it's just that the client chose something else. But
yes, I think that's a great point. We emphasize UX design as a process so much. It's so much less about what software you know, and it's about learning the design process, which you can apply to almost anything. So totally agree with that. Emphasize your process, and even if that includes mistakes or different directions that were explored but not chosen, feedback that you got from users and user testing that you maybe didn't anticipate or realize, like it's all part of the process. No one ever gets the designs right on the first try, so you have to iterate to get there, and that's part of the story. So definitely play that up. Matt has a good question. What was the hardest skill to learn during your transition to UX design? What made it difficult, and what did you do to learn it?
I would say that the harder transition, I think, was going from print to web. That took a while. And in my job at Pandora, half of my job was getting designs from other designers. I could always tell who were the print designers who were being tasked with designing a web design product because of how, like, their type would always be too small. They didn't quite think about the interactions. Whereas going from web design to UX design, I had already thought about the user. I had already thought about the way interactions work and calls to action, which are the buttons for students, or also known as CTAs. So that transition wasn't as hard for me, especially because I had the psychology background, but just thinking about, I guess, going from web design to UX design, the biggest thing that you have to learn is empathy, like just imagining what it's like for the user who has never seen your product before and what they're going to think when they are confronted with your interface design.
Totally. We have lots of good student questions. Oh, go ahead, Fabio. You got something?
I want to tackle one of the student questions because it comes up often. So a lot of companies require JavaScript, Angular, and other types of coding skills. It makes it difficult to get a job because they want everything under the title UX designer. All right, so there's one very clear advice here. I always give this one, so I'll give it again. I'll just play the recording every beginning of office hours. If you see a job posting where they seriously want you to be a proficient React front-end coder in addition to a great proficient UX design, you don't want to work there. You're gonna have an awful time working there. So just next job posting. And if you have 10 of those in a row, you're looking at the wrong companies. So like that's just a lot of companies that are gonna want you, as Danita said, to know the basics. You understand some of front-end coding, so you can talk to developers, but you will not be required to be proficient front-end developer in addition to a proficient UX designer in any company that does a decent job. Like that's like those guys, like run away from them, right? You see the job posting, throw it away. Next company. That's advice. I just want to tackle that one.
I totally agree with that. I mean, unless you're coming from being a developer and going into UX design, I don't understand why anyone would expect you to be able to code production ready React or Angular. Like it just doesn't make
like
sense.
and even if you are, let's assume you are like 1 in 1,000, you are a great developer and a great designer, do not take the job offer unless you're charging 2 salaries, because in essence you're doing 2 jobs.
Yeah.
So charge like double the hour rate, perfect, go ahead with it. Otherwise, again, you're doing 2 jobs for 1 salary, or you're just doing 2 bad jobs for 1 salary. Just skip that.
Yeah, totally agree. You're getting taken advantage of, if that's the case.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. What do you think are some common mistakes that people make when they choose to go into UX? And I guess related to that, is there anything that you would have done differently if you could go back?
So going to grad school was really expensive, and I really didn't need to do that. I probably would have maybe done a program similar to Springboard instead, or just maybe gone for a boot camp to learn more coding skills. Which, I mean, I had already done coding. I did C++ in my undergrad because I went to a computer science school for undergrad, and they make almost every major do programming. Unless you're like an English major or an art major. But so because I hadn't done extensive JavaScript coding, I just wanted to learn more about it. But I could have done that much cheaper by just taking a class instead of going to graduate school. Because I ended up realizing that graduate school was, because I had the background in psychology and in design, it was kind of pointless for me. But, you know, what else? What would I have done differently starting out? Maybe I would have gotten a job, like a physical in-person job after graduate school, and not done all of my freelancing remotely. I think that also would have been helpful, because now that I'm working with a team again, it's nice to have other designers to share work with and bounce off ideas. As a freelancer, I was often the only designer on a team. And I would ask the developers what they thought of something, and they'd always say, yeah, it looks nice to me. I mean, occasionally they'd have questions or comments about how things worked, but they never gave me any feedback on how things looked.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your transition into being a freelancer and how you found clients and managed your time and things like that?
I'd say about half of the clients I've had over the years, even as a print designer and web designer, were through an agency, and then the other half of them were ones that I found myself. And ones I found myself, I'd say maybe 75% of them were great and wonderful, and I had no issues. The other 25% were a little difficult. So I would say if you're new to freelancing, definitely look at some freelancing resources. Like Freelancers Union has a bunch of contract resources and invoicing resources. Just, you know, stuff that you should definitely have everyone sign, and never take jobs that are friends of a friend and don't have them sign a contract. I'm just going to say that.
Yes, like follow that advice. I won't add anything else. Just follow that, 100%.
Oh, and with agencies, you basically work a lot with recruiters, and some agencies have great recruiters and some recruiters aren't so great. I never was only signed up with one agency. I always had multiple agencies that I was signed up with. But it worked out great for me. Like, I got laid off in the middle of the financial crisis because I was working at Barclays during the crash. But even with that, I only had like 2 weeks between jobs. And those 2 weeks was just waiting for the background check for my next contract.
Cool. So when you are working with other designers and either interviewing potential designers to join your team or working with other designers as part of your team, what do you think what are good skills and good characteristics to look for when interviewing designers, or what are some good qualities of other designers you've worked with?
I always look for typography and information hierarchy, which is a skill that I think carries over from print design and web design into UX design, just because if you want to direct the user's attention to things, you have to know how to organize information, and sometimes complex information. If your typography skills aren't that great, or if you don't understand how to show levels of information, that's always a red flag for me.
I'll jump in with a question. If you were to go back in time capsule, go back in time, and you meet Danita when you were just getting started with web design, not even UX design, early in your career, what's an advice you would give her? I mean, like, design-wise, we don't have to get like life too deep here. Like, can stand like design level.
So actually, I think for me it was that I grew up with computers before most people had computers. My dad worked in IT, and I was comfortable with them. But for some reason, when I went to college and I learned programming, I was still scared. I was amazed that I was able to pass that class. But there is no reason for me to be scared. And I think just realizing that programming, it seems really hard and magical, but it's not. It's learnable like any other skill. And maybe just getting past that fear earlier, I think, would have taken me some time.
Awesome. Great to hear that. We have 2 minutes left. So the last thing I want to go over is, tell us a little about how you think UX is going to change in future years, in the coming years. Are developers going to take our jobs? Do we build a wall? How do we handle that? How do you see design in the next few years? And based off of that, what advice would you give students so that they can prepare for what's coming?
I think we're going to see new input devices. So I don't know if you've seen Skinput, projected interface onto your arm. It's a really cool project I think that came out of the Disney Research Lab as well. So if you want to Google it, as well as VR interfaces and eye movement interfaces. I think those are going to be the future of UX.
And how do students get ready for that?
Basically, focus on the basic skills, like understanding the user, understanding how basic research skills, because the research isn't the process you go through isn't going to change. You're still going to want to watch users walk through the interface. Just it's going to be a totally different interface, and you're going to be taking more of a leap of faith when you do your first version of the interface, because there's no conventions for it yet. But, you're still going to, in order to make it intuitive and usable, you're still going to have to watch people do it. How you watch them might change, but the actual process is going to be the same.
Awesome. Well, great to hear that. Good advice. So to whoever's, to the students in the call, I agree with Danita 100%. We're going to see a lot more emphasis in VR, AR, and interfaces that are not necessarily in your screen, your computer screen. So just learning the basics and making sure you really know the fundamentals. They're gonna, if you do that and you really get a good grasp, changing the specific interaction environments are not going to affect you that much. So learn the fundamentals and stick with them. Well, Danita, this was a great call so far. Do you have any more questions, Emily? Anything you want to ask?
I think that wraps up our questions. And if you have any last thoughts or advice you want to share as the students are getting through their curriculums and getting through their projects, I think we could wrap it up with that.
Or not, like if you don't have it's fine. By the way, like no pressure, like if you don't have it's okay.
One of the questions my students have is they're finding it hard to focus on their capstone versus their portfolio website. So I'm sure other students are also having this problem because designing your portfolio site seems way more fun because it's like kind of based on your preferences as opposed to, having to do all these steps like your capstone project. But I would say you should be working on both of them together and don't like pause going through the class or don't stop reading and watching the videos just because you think the portfolio design is more fun. I would say work on both, otherwise you're going to be scrambling at the end or at the end of when you thought how much you wanted to pay for the class. So
totally, you have to have things to put in your portfolio.
Exactly. Well, awesome advice, great insights, and an awesome discussion today. Thank you so much for joining, Danita. And join us next week for office hours. We'll have a capstone project presentation from a student who completed the course just a few weeks ago. So it should be an exciting inspiration to see what a completed capstone project and portfolio look like. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great rest of the week.
Awesome. Great call, Danita. Thanks for joining as well. Really, really great to hear advice on your story. And guys, next week, as Katerina said, be here. You must be here. We'll catch up next week. Thanks. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.